The head of the European Parliament has warned the Swiss to be braced for some hard negotiations. This comes after Sunday's referendum that narrowly voted to introduce immigration quotas for foreigners who work there, a measure that flies in the face of a 1999 treaty the Swiss signed with the European Union. Nick Rushworth explains.
The Swiss, in a referendum on Sunday, chose to limit the number of people allowed in from the European Union. That choice casts a shadow over ties with the EU, not least economic ones.
This is a worrying vote because it means that Switzerland wants to withdraw into itself. That is a trend now on one hand, but on the other, there's a paradox. 60% of Switzerland's foreign trade is with the European Union.
Switzerland has damaged itself with this result. Switzerland must realize that cherry-picking with the EU is not a long-term strategy.
Cherry-picking because Switzerland is saying it wants to go back on a freedom of movement agreement with the EU while keeping other advantages. Business leaders are worried whether access to foreign labour will dry up. People on the streets of Geneva, though, say the decision was motivated by a perceived threat to Swiss jobs.
This is all about the economy, because people are afraid that immigrants will come here en masse and take their jobs.
Many young Swiss people finish internships and then have no work. Young French people take their place, so I understand the attitude.
Around 80,000 EU immigrants moved to Switzerland last year. Foreign nationals now make up almost a quarter of the country's 8 million population. Unlike its neighbours, unemployment is low, but the Swiss feel the influx from abroad is scary and want to raise the drawbridge.
Well, joining us now, Thomas Liebig, senior economist at the International Migrations Division of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, based here in Paris. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening.
50.3% voted yes. You lived in Switzerland, you were telling us before we went on air for a decade. Surprised?
In a way, yes. I mean, like always, these votes have been pretty tight on this tough foreigners issues in Switzerland. But normally the Swiss have taken the other stance. So the majority has always been in favor of a moderate policy. And I mean, there's a certain amount of irrational fears that have come to surface through this vote, and that this has ultimately become that result has come to surprise to many, including myself.
Irrational fears.
Yes. What is surprising in the case of Switzerland is that if you look in terms of objective numbers, certainly the flows have been very high. They're much higher than among any other OECD country, with the notable exception of Luxembourg, of course, which is a very special case. So the flows have been very high. But few other countries have benefited also as much from immigration as Switzerland. The net fiscal impact, for example, we did a study on this last year, and Switzerland is the largest among all OECD countries that the Swiss taxpayers have gained from migration. So immigration has kept unemployment at a decent level. Immigration has kept taxes low. And also the most migration, of course, has gone to the city centers, but that's not where the people voted against the migration. I mean, that's where
people complained about the rising real estate prices.
Yes. It's more in the rural areas where there's few immigrants, actually, where the strongest anti-vote has been. That's clearly showing also that there's been a mix of different issues, not only related to labor migration, which has clearly been the driving force of migration flows to Switzerland, but also other issues that were at stake here.
Rural areas where not many migrants live, that mirrors a little bit what we see in this country with the National Front.
Yes, that's a common issue in many countries, that it's quite often there where there's fewest contact with immigrants, where there's the fewest immigrants going, where people are most anti-immigrant.
Some of the strongest reactions we've seen this Monday have come from your native Germany. Why is that?
Well, first of all, Germany has been one of the key origin countries of immigration to Switzerland. Every 1 out of 2 highly educated Germans who have left the country has gone to Switzerland. And of course, Germany has very close ties with Switzerland, as has France, by the way. But I think the ties with Germany between Germany and Switzerland are even stronger. At the same time, of course, there's a whole fear that this debate about the free mobility issue, which has of course much larger implications beyond Switzerland, is going to rise to the surface. And that's, I think, where a lot of countries have taken a firm stance.
So hang on a second. Switzerland is not a member
Yes.
of the European Union. They did sign this treaty in 1999. So there's a fear that there could be a knock-on effect inside of the EU proper?
I think the issue is very different, of course, in the case of Switzerland than from the other EU countries. Because freedom of movement was just one part of a series of treaties, which are all interlinked. So that's kind of putting the whole relationship between Switzerland and the EU at stake. And I think that's also why there has been this quite strong reactions from a lot of countries. But once again, the Swiss situation is, of course, very, very specific because of the high inflows and also because Switzerland is not a part of the European Union.
What will it mean ultimately then for... because we've seen a lot of strong rhetoric out of London from the British Prime Minister when it comes when Romania and Bulgaria entered the European Union properly, and it's come up again most recently in Britain. Is this going to sort of egg on Eurosceptics to put more quotas on immigration, on the free movement of people within the European Union?
Well, within the EU, of course, the issue is a bit different, because freedom of movement is one of the four fundamental pillars of the European Union. In the case of Switzerland, of course, they are a substantial part. They are linked with all the other treaties that Switzerland has concluded in '99, as you said, with the EU and its member countries. But as Switzerland is not a part of the EU, it's not the same. It's of course not the same stake that's as, for example, for a country like the UK or for Germany or for France or for others.
Martin Schulz, the head of the European Parliament, this Monday warned that the Swiss to be braced for some hard negotiations over this. How hard could those negotiations be? Could there be a situation where relations sour? How much can relations sour with the EU?
Well, as I said, because the freedom of movement is an essential part of the whole European integration, and including of Switzerland integration into the European Union, the European market, so to speak. That's why I think that's why we see some of these reactions. Ultimately, it remains to be seen also in terms of practice how the Swiss actually will implement that vote, because there's a lot of open issues still out there. How it actually the quotas, for example, will be set, and how the exact details, that still remains to be fixed. And the impact in terms of migration flows does not necessarily have to be very large. But what's at stake, of course, is a much broader issue of Switzerland's relationship with the European Union.
I was going to say, because we've had a lot of bad blood over banking. The European Union wants to tighten controls on banking. They've put a lot of pressure on Switzerland. Now this, would you say that after Sunday's vote, Switzerland's relationship with the rest of Europe is at an all-time low?
No, I wouldn't say that, because it will very much depend on how exactly these kind of implementation issues will be made, and also how the EU ultimately will react. So I think that's a key issue, basically. How is the EU going to react to that Swiss vote? In the past, Switzerland has always found quite pragmatic ways of implementing popular votes, to find pragmatic solutions to the restrictions that are imposed. And also the initiative leaves a significant array of leeway, and it remains to be seen how that will be used and how that will be interpreted on the side of the EU, of course.
All right, so there'll be a bit of wiggling by politicians, is what you're saying. There was a 1974 film called Bread and Chocolate, which I don't know if you remember. Nino Manfredi plays an Italian immigrant who goes to Switzerland, finds a very closed society. The Switzerland of today, how much does it resemble the one depicted in a satirical manner almost in that movie of 4 decades ago now?
Well, I think Switzerland, particularly if you look at the areas, as I said, where there's been a lot of immigration, you also see that the society has changed a lot, I think. And there's a certain, you must understand that Switzerland has had the largest immigration inflows of any OECD country by far. So in a way, I think that's an underlying fact that we cannot put away if we interpret this vote. Switzerland has hosted the largest number of immigrants of any European country apart from Luxembourg. So there is a certain degree of openness that's already mirrored.
And what kind of immigrants? That's the question.
Well, it's true that most of Switzerland, that was, in a way, the interesting fact that in spite of having a rather liberal policy, because of the majority of immigrants coming from EU countries, there was freedom of mobility, Switzerland managed to attract a lot of highly skilled migrants. The integration outcomes of the European migrants, or of immigrants in general in Switzerland, are very good. Switzerland has the highest employment rate among immigrants of all OECD countries. So in a way, the integration results are pretty good. The economic impact seems to be pretty favorable. And now it just remains to be seen what will change.
And Thomas Liebig predicting that the politicians will kind of wiggle around those new quotas that have been voted upon on Sunday. I want to thank you for joining us here. Stay with us. Much more to come here on France 24. We'll have more news. The day's sports, including the latest from the Olympics, and business with Marcus Carlson. Stay with us.